Jackie's going to talk about the other part of computing EPDs. Remember how I said that DNA is now being used in the computation of EPDs? Well, Jackie's going to talk a little bit about that. So,
PhD, PhD, what does this information do for you? And I think this picture says it perfectly. You have a trade-off between some money to do that testing and buying you time. And how does that buy you time? It is giving you a more accurate prediction of your EPDs earlier on in the life of that animal. So, hold this so I can talk to everybody in the back of the room. An animal starts out, like we've been talking about, their prediction of their EPD starts out as the average of their dam's EPD and their sire EPD, but we all know that they don't stay there very often. As we get more information on that animal, the EPD lands closer to their true genetic potential. And the reason why they don't all end up as an average of their dam and their sire is due to Mendelian sampling. We don't know which direction that EPD is going to move, but it's probably going to move. And why it moves is shown here. So if you consider 3 bowls, and we use our special magic spyglasses where we can look at the DNA that animal has, there are places or genes that are detrimental to that particular trait, that drive that trait lower, and there are genes that increase that trait or improve that trait. So if you consider this bull on the top line, if we were able to actually look at his genetic makeup, there would be, you would add all these numbers up and you divide it by 2, as Wade and Lauren helped us understand why that's important. And that's the EPD that you come up with. So this top bowl here is the best bowl if we think that a higher number is better. And the middle bowl here is the worst bowl. But what I want you to take home from this slide is that even the best bowl has negative numbers. And even the worst bowl has positive numbers. And so when when fertilization occurs, it's kind of a luck of the draw occurrence if they're going to get the favorable genes or the unfavorable genes. And some animals will have lots of the good genes, and some animals will have lots of the bad genes. And we don't know who those are when we don't have any information on that individual animal other than parental EPD. This is the example that Wade was talking about. There are 4 full siblings from one flush in 1976. There's the parents. And if you plug this into planned mating, here are the EPDs that you get. And I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to see. But the point of this is, once we get information on those animals, these are all high accuracy bowls. And what you see is that they move quite a bit from the average of their parental EPDs. And we don't know which ones are going to move in which direction. But after time and lots of data, we can figure out where they're going to land. And the key to DNA testing is we can zero in on that a little bit earlier. We're still not going to get to a high accuracy point, but we're going to get closer to that animal's true breeding value.
So Jackie, can you, if you stay on that slide you're on, I know some of us back here, the old guys again, they can't see so well. And if you could just kind of go down the list of, for instance, cavities, the top to the bottom of cavities and growth and so forth.
Right. So The parental average, or PM on here, for Cavanese was 0.1. Eagle ended up with Cavanese of 4.1. Mr. Clean, 1.6. Hold Preference, 3.7. And North Star was a negative 3.0.
So in his day, I suspect Eagle might have been a Cavanese trait leader. In his day, back in what year were they born and learned?
1976.
76. So what about growth?
So growth, focus on weaning weight. The parental average was 50.15. Eagle had a 47.8. Mr. Clean, 65.0. Whole Preference, 43.5. And North Star, 43.4. So Mr. Clean was about 15 pounds higher than parental average.
That was that weaning?
Weaning,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that would put, you would be very many different percentile levels in the same flush. Now, did we bring this up because this would be an unusual flush? Do you think this is just something rare? Actually, this is pretty common. What's rare about this is that these are all bulls that have what? 0.9 accuracy. And that's why we're seeing that spread. If we start out, if all they were was pedigree estimates, what would they look like then? They'd all be the same. And as more and more data comes in other words, as accuracies go higher and higher and higher, this kind of thing you're going to see all the time because more data spreads animals out. Those bulls are going to spread. So yes, they're the same flush. Yes, they're full siblings. Yes, on the average, they share half of their genes. But as you can see, full siblings can be very, very different. All you have to do is think about your own family to realize that.
Yeah, my brother.
I know you are all the best in your own families, and there's got to be some bond mentors in there.
And the recipient cow, some of them have a longer gestation period than others. And so that makes a difference. But I had some calves that were born same flesh and they're 2 weeks older than the other first 3 weeks.
Yeah, Don says out of the same flush, putting EPs in recipient cows 21 days, Gary says, between the firstborn to the lastborn. So, yeah.
Okay, so.
Gordon has a question there.
Oh.
Since the old guys in the back are getting picked on so bad, and Jackie, it is true that we can't hear and we can't see quite as well as we once did.
There's spots up front.
But you got me on that one. I'll surrender to that. But as we age, we do gain a little wisdom and we learn to be attentive and listen to what's being said. Quantitative trait that we hope Wade will improve on as he ages. But I'm assuming that now you will move into the crystal ball effect of the DNA. And that is the thing that's so critical for people to understand. It's not the movement of the EPDs itself that's important with the DNA enhancement of the EPDs. It is the increase in accuracy. And we all think there's no way of having a crystal ball, there's no way of looking into the future, but I think you're probably fixing to show us there is a way. And through DNA, you can actually get about a third of the way to those high accuracy bulls that took 10 to 15 years to reach that point.
Do you have a question?
Yes, so we'll keep moving Gordon, so you can see. Okay, so I don't know that we're going to cover all of this because we're running along, but here's my goal. I want to talk to you about DNA testing and what it is, why you should consider doing it, who you should test, how to go about doing the test, and when you should test. Okay, so DNA is stored in 30 pairs of chromosomes in the nucleus of the cell. These chromosomes are made up of nucleotides. These are the building blocks of the DNA. There are 4 options, A, G, T, and C. And a bovine has 3 billion nucleotides in every cell. And the sequence of those A, G's, T's, and C's, those 3 billion nucleotides is key to genetic variation. So again, I apologize, it's hard to see all the way in the back, but what we see here is bull A has a string of nucleotides, bull B has the same string of nucleotides, except at this red point, and that is one point in the genome that they differ, and that's called a single nucleotide polymorphism. One nucleotide that's different, S and P, or pronounced SNP. So these are what we test for when we do the DNA testing, and this image shows the 29 chromosomes, the sex chromosomes are left off, and along those chromosomes, at every one of these little dashes, is a SNP. And this is for a 10,000 SNP test. So what you can see is that they are all over that genome. And that's 10,000 SNP test. Our low density test has 3 times that number of markers. Our high density test now has 150,000 SNPs included in it. So it's quite a bit of data. What do we do with that data? Well, thankfully there are very intelligent people like Lauren and Wade and Dorian and others who have found a way to use that information. What they do, what we start off with is a training population of really high accuracy, actively used animals. So we feel confident that their EPD is a reflection of their true breeding value. And we get the DNA information on these animals, and we look at how that information tells a story about the EPDs. And what comes out of that are some equations that can connect the DNA data, the SNP data, to the EPD. So we come up with molecular breeding values, or MBVs. Those MBVs are then combined or blended with the existing EPD, and you get genetically enhanced or genomically enhanced EPDs. We don't stop there. Those equations are then validated on a new population of animals that weren't included in the training population to make sure that those equations are working on the rest of the population. Okay, so here is an example of an animal on HerdBook or on our website, and this GE up top is telling you that their EPDs have been enhanced with DNA testing. So why should you do this? What can it do for you? The big point is that it helps you make better selection decisions with higher accuracy EPDs on young animals. And the reason why that is important is if you are making a decision with a piece of information that is more accurate, you are going to make change faster. And hopefully that change is progress. It might not always be progress, but it's going to help you make faster change. And I think in the cattle business, it takes so long from generation to generation, it takes so long to make genetic change that anything that we can do to help us along that process move faster will be beneficial. So another way to think about this is progeny equivalence. What does having that DNA testing information do for you? It's the equivalent of having 5 progeny records for calving 7 records for birth weight, 8 records for weaning weight, 9 for yearling weight, 8 for milk, 3 for maternal calving, 28 for stability. It is the equivalent of having 28 daughters report some stability. That's huge. Think of the amount of time it would take to get that information in a progeny test. Shear force is 6, marbling 8. I guess I didn't put in yield grade. Red body is 4. Or there. Okay, so here's another way of looking at this. If you think of the accuracy of the EPD, when all we have is a pedigree average, we would expect to have an accuracy somewhere around 10% for that EPD. If you add the animal's own performance, all of this is theoretical, by the way. This is just a theoretical example, but what you see is an accuracy boost to about 23%. If you add 13 progeny, you get up to somewhere around 40%. If you have DNA testing, that gets you somewhere similar to that 40% as well, depending on the trait. As we add progeny, progeny data plus the DNA data, you get up to about 46%. But the other take-home message I want all of you to walk home with is you are never going to get to a high accuracy situation without lots of progeny. DNA testing alone is not going to do that for you. You still need to get measurements. We still need to get all that important data that Lauren was talking about. Okay, the other fabulous thing about DNA testing is that parentage is included. Parent DNA has to be on file for us to make that comparison, but parentage is included in that test. And what we are seeing, and not just with our own association, but several associations report a 5 to 10% of the reported parentage parents initially reported are wrong. And so cleaning up that information is a wonderful side benefit of doing this DNA testing. So again, here's a report from the ASA, and down here it says animal qualified through DNA desire. That's the verbiage you want to look for. If it says animal does not qualify, you're going to get a call from us, and you need to pursue that. Okay, who to test? It is required to do PhD or a high-density test on our sires and our donor dams. And you may be scratching your head thinking, well, you just told me that those high-accuracy animals it's not going to make much of a difference on. But it's important for the integrity of these equations that we maintain that training population with our high-accuracy, high-impact animals. So that is why that is required. But we do have the GGP-LD, or the low-density test. It's $50. It includes parentage. And this is a great option if you are able to pull it off for your replacement heifers, cows, and bulls in your herd that are not considered as AI prospects. If you do test animals with the low-density test and then a year later decide, I'm going to make this an AI bull, you're going to have to go back and do the GGP-HD on that animal. So, but the low-density test has a nearly equivalent improvement in the accuracy of the EPDs. And I would just ask yourselves, what would you pay to have 8 progeny on the ground on that animal, to progeny test that animal? Would you pay $50? And if the answer is yes, I think that an LD option is the right fit. So to test an animal, you call us or email us at dna@simgene.com. We need registration numbers, tattoo, sex, sire, and dam information, and you also have to let us know if you want to do a blood bladder card or a hair card. The lab, it's a lot more intensive for the lab to work with hair cards, so they are now charging us for DNA samples that are on hair. So we are now charging you for DNA samples that you send in with hair. So if you're comfortable with it, it's good to switch over to a blood bladder card because you'll save yourself $3 a sample. Some folks aren't real comfortable with that. It's really not that difficult. If you restrain an animal, you can find a vein on the back of the ear and prick it. You want to let a few drops flow before collecting on the blood bladder card. So I would recommend that all of you, whether or not you think you're going to use the information or not, collect some DNA on animals that there's a chance that you might need them in the future. We get it all the time that, where parentage doesn't come through and we're looking for other samples and there's no other samples to compare to. Or their herd's hired died and we don't have anything to compare to. So if you had an archive of DNA samples from your herd, at least you could go back and look at those animals. So I would recommend making it a standard part of your operating procedures. When you do get these cards, you want to double check that the ID on the card is the same ID as the animal you are collecting the DNA from. That sounds obvious, but it would save you some headache in the future. Remove dirt and manure from the area because it'll contaminate the DNA results. On blood cards, you want to fill, there's a little black circle on them. You need to fill that circle completely with blood. If you saturate the card, you need to set it aside and let it dry completely. You don't want to stack it on top of other cards because we get DNA contamination from the sample on those. So set it aside, let it dry completely. You also want to let it dry completely because you can get mold issues, which also contaminates the results. Forever. Stick it in a shoebox. Yeah. That's why I say, even if you don't necessarily plan on doing the DNA testing right now, get a sample. Because it's a lot easier down the road if you need it to have it stored somewhere. Hair cards, again, we're really encouraging people to move to blood, but if you do collect hair, don't cut the hair off. The DNA is in the nucleus of the cell, and the nucleus of that hair cell is at the root bulb. So you have to pull it out. You can't be nice and cut it out. And you need a pencil thickness of hair to have enough DNA. Okay, so when should you test? If we are doing this test to make better selection decisions, to have higher accuracy EPDs, you need to do that before you make those selection decisions. That sounds obvious, but that's not always the order that people do this in. So do it before you are deciding which heifers to keep, or before you're deciding which bull to use. It takes 3 to 4 weeks for results. If there are any problems with parentage, it will take longer. So the point is, don't wait. Get it done. And we're coming into busy season, and so things just get harder and longer as that is in full swing. So take-home points. The DNA testing, it's not a magic bullet. It's not going to make a high accuracy animal, but it will give you more accuracy in your EPDs earlier on in that animal's life. So it buys you time. It helps you make genetic change faster. It improves the accuracy of the EPDs, but the key to that is you need to have that information included in the EPDs before you're making the selection with those EPDs. It confirms parentage. It will never replace the need to collect measurements. We heard a guy at a conference this summer say, well, I'm going to do DNA testing, so I'm not going to have to weigh my calves anymore. Oh, you will still have to weigh your calves. And really the exciting thing I think about DNA technology, it's great right now, but it's going to get better. And there are 2 things with this. The quantum leap software is going to use the DNA in a manner where we get more information out of it. And, but the other thing is as more and more people genotype their animals, the more genotypes we have in the system, the better those equations are at using that information. And so we'll get more information on an individual animal as a larger pool of animals has been genotyped. So the last point I would like to make is that I think we have something to be proud of in the IGS system. We have 16 million animals in that evaluation. That's the largest beef evaluation in the world. Not just the largest multi-breed evaluation, that is the largest beef evaluation. But what I would like to rally our membership around is we are way under some of our competitors when it comes to the number of genotyped animals and the number of carcass reports that we have in our system. So collecting more of that data will make our evaluation even better. And yes?
I had a question for you on the DNA test. Since most of them, and I don't think a lot of people realize, but they're breed specific. For example, Angus have their markers, Red Angus, Hereford, and Simmental, but when only 40% of your cattle are purebred, how do you incorporate the other breed components in your DNA test?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm going to make way to answer it.
So, on the question, so what we have found in the early years of DNA, the development of DNA genetic evaluation, if you will, the thought was, well, we're going to round up all kinds of DNA samples, and then we're going to be able to go out there and we're going to be able to apply that to any animal out there. Well, what we found, as Don said, it's very specific. So if you want to test to work on Angus, you have to have developed it on Angus. And very specific Angus, not Angus over in Australia. You have to develop it for Angus in the U.S. if you want to use it in the U.S. So that's the key. It has to be developed on a specific population you're trying to predict on. So in our population, we have some straight Angus, we have some hybrid Sim-Angus, and we have some purebred, full-blood, Simbra animals, a lot of diversity. But as long as we have those different populations well represented in our training population, in other words, as long as we have some straight Angus, we can do a pretty good job of predicting on straight Angus because we have lots of straight Angus in our DNA training population. We can do a pretty good job of predicting on Sim-Angus because we have lots of them. And purebred Simmental, we have lots of them in the training population. Now, I'm going to say this, we don't have lots of full-bloods, at least modern full-bloods. That's the other thing. We have lots of full-bloods that go back many years. Well, as each generation goes by, your ability to predict on the current animals, which is the ones you're interested in, so our ability to pick on or predict on current full-bloods and current Simbra is not very good. But we can do a good job with Angus, Sim-Angus, and purebreds because they're well represented in the population. So that's the key. Now, we're working, the technology is evolving every day. I mean, there's new things that happen every day. There's new chapters in the book every time you turn around. So the ultimate goal is to be able to take whatever population you have that you've trained on and actually be able to apply it across the board to everything. And there may be a day that that will happen. Right now, it has to be, like Don said, it has to be very specific. And so we can do three things pretty well. Angus, Sim-Angus, and purebred Simmental. Get outside of that, not so well. Yes, Sally?
Well, in your Sim-Angus population, you've got lots of different percentages. You've got 3/4 Angus and 4/4. In your Sim-Angus population, you've got lots of different combinations of still Sim-Angus. So if you throw those on the same pile, there still are differences. Do you just throw those all in a pile, the Sim-Angus population?
Well, we do break those populations down, and we're looking at even now, Bruce Golden who I'll talk about Operation Quantum Leap, is looking at different strategies to do that. You can approach it where you throw them all in the same pile essentially, but we probably can do a little better job of predicting if we break those piles apart. And so right now we're looking at breaking those piles apart. But actually our pile is pretty big, because when we talk about this thing called IGS, International Genetic Solutions, we have somewhere, what was that file, Lauren? 100,000 animals? I think we have 100,000 animals that are genotyped across, of course, that's several breeds. We've got 12 different breed associations in the mix. But what you said, Sally, is there are different strategies to use, and one of them is throwing them all in the same pile, and that can be effective, but you're really only going to get good predictions when you have animals that are closely related to that pile. If they're closely related to that pile of animals that are in the training population, you will get good predictions.
So just to clarify, if I have a group of commercial heifers that are out of a purebred or Sim Angus bull, will these passport on those heifers to make selection decisions? And then the second question is, where does ultrasound fit into this? Will genetic testing replace ultrasound for carcass spreads?
Good questions?
Yeah, and I would say on the commercial heifers, for the parentage, if we have DNA on the sires that were used on them, then we can compare them. It's a click of a button. Once the information has been completed, the lab testing has been completed. And it will be better it will be a better way to make that decision than not using the information. As far as the ultrasound goes, we are not advocating that this will substitute any data collection. We want that information within the system. This is just another point of information, another area to try and get closer to that true breeding value of the animal.
Yeah, so progeny data are still going to be the most important. They're still going to have the most influence, so we still need those records. And then also, we do need those records in order to keep training the DNA stuff. DNA is just a small component of the EPD. For the time being, who knows, like in 20 years, we could maybe, get a whole sequence and get the exact EPD, but we can't do that right now. So it's just, we still need that progeny data,
It must be a highway.
for several reasons. So please keep collecting.
It has to be eaten back. Jackie?
Yep.
There's a very positive relationship between putting Angus and Simmental together for heterosis.